Hi everyone, welcome back to Demand Decoded. Thanks for tuning in and taking the time to join us. I'm Dan Stilgo, Marketing Manager at Blend, and joined today, as usual, by Phil Vallander, Co-Founder at Blend. And before we get stuck into the main topic, this is a bit weird, isn't it?
It's a bit weird, it's a bit different, it's good.
We're in the same room. This is strange. The first time that we've recorded a live Demand Decoded in the same room. So
Yeah. Loving the new digs that you've put a lot of effort into, and getting used to doing these in the physical presence of one another.
It is weird. Hopefully a bit of a different energy. I don't know, more energy. I feel alive. I feel ready to go.
Okay, all right, good.
You've had a bit of practice already, obviously.
Yeah, we've done a few recordings in here for our other podcast, Websites Decoded.
Yeah.
Feel free to check that out.
Well, yeah, if you haven't checked it out already, I definitely would. Yeah, Phil does a great job on that of basically telling you how to improve the performance of your website. So yeah, little plug. All right, well, now that's out of the way and we're here, let's dive into the topic of today's podcast, which is, does blogging still have a place in B2B demand generation? And this is a really interesting topic because not too long ago, actually, blogging was the go-to medium for B2B marketing. When you think about HubSpot's inbound marketing playbook and approach, back in 2010, 2012, blogging was a fundamental part of that. And everybody seemed to be doing it. Everybody had a blog. Everybody was blogging and consistently doing so. But nobody's really talking about blogging anymore for some reason.
Yeah.
And is that because blogging is just not attractive anymore, or is it because it's not effective anymore? Hopefully we can break that down, clear it up in this episode. Yep. Obviously, you've been blogging for a while now, probably over 10 years, but have also started to take on a lot of the more kind of attractive and trendy B2B marketing tactics and mediums that people seem to be doing now.
Yeah, you can't afford to stand still in B2B marketing, and you've always got to keep an eye on what's changing, particularly in terms of buyer behavior. But started blogging regularly for Blend and for clients quite some time ago now, as you say. Very quickly saw what the positive impact of that was, and have continued to refine my and Blend's understanding of what the impact and benefit of blogging can be and how to use it in your B2B strategy. And so we're still doing it today, and we'll talk, no doubt, about why in this session.
Absolutely. And if you do have any questions, as usual, whilst we're live, feel free to add them to the comment section on LinkedIn. And I do still have the same functionality, I think, here, to bring up comments. If you do have any, stick them in.
Keep an eye on that.
And I'll keep an eye and we can bring those in. If you do have questions, I noticed there was one before we started, so we can talk about that as we go, kind of when it comes up in conversation. Right, so I think right off the bat, let's answer the core question, right? Does blogging still have a place in B2B demand generation? Let's get it out there.
Yes. Yes. The answer is most definitely yes. Blogging has a very big place in B2B demand generation. That's not to say it's the absolute right strategy for each and every single business out there. There are exceptions. There are industries, verticals, sectors, markets, offerings where blogging doesn't offer the same impact. But in the majority of cases, for the majority of businesses, for lots of businesses, there is still a huge range of benefits of blogging, and it still features very prominently in demand generation, in my view. Do you agree?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, whilst there are more attractive things to go after now, blogging is still one of the most fundamental things that you can do to get predictable, sustainable results. There's a load of benefits.
We're already touching, marketers as a community have shiny object syndrome to a degree. We're always looking for the next thing, the new thing, and that's part of what we'll talk about today for sure. And there are new things that are relevant, but when new things become relevant, they don't necessarily push out what was working, what is working, and replace them. They can supplement them and they can augment them, and that's been our approach. We are adopting new mediums, new channels, new tactics, but not without thought anyway, replacing anything that we're doing. And blogging still features very much in our strategy.
Absolutely. And it'd be good if we could touch on a few of the reasons why.
Yeah.
Why are we saying yes to that question? Why are we saying yes, blogging does still have a place in B2B demand generation? And I think to get started, attracting an audience through search is probably reason number one for blogging. You're attracting people to your website to interact with your brand that had probably never heard of you before.
Yeah. Search is still very relevant. Buyers are still using it, all the time. And blogging is still a very, very effective way at being found, cost effective, not just results effective, cost effective way of being found by those buyers when they're using search in the ways that they use search. One of the things that I think applies to all the benefits of blogging that we'll talk about, and one of the things that I love about it, is how much it's in our control as well, and how much we can dictate the impact that we have. Whereas there are lots of other strategies and channels, some good, some less good, that really leave you out of control of the result. So being able to create content, put it out there, and have your audience find it, that's great. That's fantastic. And it's still very, very important today, because although there's change in buyer behavior and in the way people use channels, search is far, far, far from being a thing of history. It's alive and kicking.
Yeah, and basically you go where your audience is, right? And if your audience is using search, we should touch on that question in a bit, though. I don't want to go there yet. But yeah, if your audience is using search, then why wouldn't you create a blog to attract them to your website where they're engaging, and seeing your brand, experiencing, consuming your expertise, and knowing that you're the person that could, or the brand that could solve their problem.
Yeah, well, we'll probably touch on the reasons why you might not do that, but none of them are good, and should be resisted, because you're right, it is incredibly important, incredibly effective, and incredibly valuable to be where your buyers are when they're using search. Absolutely. The second benefit is one that's frequently overlooked, and I think frequently contributes to waning interest in blogging. And that's the contribution it can make to your overall SEO success or failure. A lot of people instinctively understood why blogging, a lot of marketers in particular, understood why blogging was attractive as a strategy, but set about it with a focus very much on the content in front of them, and less so on the way to organize, interconnect, interlink, and structure that content for an SEO benefit throughout your entire digital real estate. From the blog post you're writing today to all the key commercial pages that are on your main website navigation, blogging can contribute through internal linking more directly than anything else to the SEO positions and the organic traffic that you receive to all of those pages. And that's almost the secret source of blogging. The direct impact it can have on your organic traffic and your SEO is why I love it as a B2B marketing, B2B demand generation tactic.
That's probably something that you actually brought more to my attention when I joined Blend. Like, it's hard to actually communicate quite how impactful that is.
That marketers sometimes develop little blind spots or grey areas, and we've all been taught to sort of fear penalty, penalization by Google, by overdoing things, by gaming the system, and so on. And a lot of that is right. Ripping off content, duplicating content, keyword stuffing won't do you any good at all. But somewhere along the way, exact match internal linking got given a bad name. And for the most part, a lot of B2B blogging takes place either with no real internal linking. It's often scan a blog post from a business we're helping or talking to, and you'll see zero internal links anywhere. Or if there are internal links, they're all sideways to other blog content, and none of them point up the commercial chain, if you like. And it's because people fear doing too much exact match internal linking. But I've seen the impact that doing it just a little bit of that, 2 or 3 links per post to your commercial pages for using the keywords they're optimized for, the impact that can have on your ranking position for those terms. And my hypothesis is that for the majority of us, we're so far away from the level where penalty occurs that there's nothing to worry about. And on numerous occasions, we have both now seen the movement you can generate by implementing that internal linking. And it's implied in, pillar page, topic cluster strategy, but it's rarely said explicitly. Internally link using the exact keywords to boost your position for them, but it's really good. And blogging's a great opportunity to create lots of those types of links, while still being in a very safe area, versus the algorithms that are at play.
Yeah, obviously, like, your commercial page needs to be optimized for that high intent commercial keyword that you want it to rank for in the first place. But if you have that in place right now already, and you have 100 plus blogs already on your website, if you were to go back through some of those on a similar topic to that commercial page and that keyword that you want to rank for, and you do add those direct match commercial keyword links in your blog posts, I think people can expect to see a pretty good increase. I'd argue that, like, if you're sat around the bottom of page 1 right now for that commercial keyword, you go back through 10 blogs, add in that exact match keyword link from your blog to your commercial page, you could expect to go up 5 places plus.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only word of warning is that we have seen that in certain situations where keywords are very, very competitive or very mature in terms of what's been ranking, or there's a change taking place in terms of what content ranks well, then the impact of that can either take longer to show itself, or in some cases not be as rock solid predictable. But in many cases, in a lot of markets, you can really improve where you rank for those commercial keywords through internal linking in the existing blog posts you've got. And then obviously every one you go on to create afterwards is an opportunity to do even more of it. So those two things, attracting that audience via search and then using that to pass on relevance, authority, and ultimately increase rankings for commercial keywords, are what I'd call like the direct benefits of producing blog content. But there's other benefits to blogging as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we get on to that, just one question that popped into my mind, actually. If a blog post has more traffic than others, or significant traffic, would that give more kind of link equity, as the kind of term is, to the commercial page? Or does traffic really matter?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to assume that Google and other search engines are operating the way they say they are, which is they're looking at a huge range of signals and, for the most part, trying to create the best user experience for users of Google and the websites that Google send traffic to. So more visitors to a piece of content implies better quality, better value, better eat. And if not directly, will correlate with ranking signals that mean better position for it and more relevance and more authority. We've all got domain authority, which we can build over time, and good quality content that's visited frequently, that people stay on, that ranks highly, is going to increase the authority of your domain at large, which then feeds back into where new position ranks and how quickly it ranks there, and the cycle goes on. So definitely want more people to visit your content. It's not the only thing to think about when creating content, for sure, but if it happens, then it's definitely a success.
Yeah. Okay, so to touch on one of the other points that I think you were alluding to,
I am.
One of the things that I quite like about blogging, and is kind of a byproduct of the generation of traffic that you get from blogs, is the ability to then set up website retargeting audiences to utilize on ad platforms. If you think about it, when you set up ad campaigns, cold ad campaigns to cold audiences, you're already trying to communicate a new message to them. You don't quite know where they're at, if they understand, if they have a problem, or if they're currently looking for solutions, or potentially even vendors, if you think about kind of like versus blogs. the beauty of creating retargeting audiences that involve your blogs is that you kind of already know where these people are at on the journey, or at least vaguely. You have a better idea than if they were just a flat out cold audience. So it really allows you to create a better targeting in ads a lot of the time. I would rather use a retargeting audience that's from my website and a few selected blogs if I wanted to, than a completely cold audience.
Yeah, and in the current climate, I'd rather use that than a list of leads that I've forced to download the content in order to be able to receive it. You know, the approach you're describing affords the buyer their privacy from us. Okay, LinkedIn's got their data, but I think they're okay with that. But they don't want to go around giving their data to 100 different B2B vendors every day. And so we afford them their privacy that way, but we're still able to utilize interest signals of interest, of relevance, of intent to further our awareness amongst them, their affinity for us, but without trying to hoodwink them into becoming a lead and get spammed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say you shouldn't have cold audiences on ad campaign. Like, don't get me wrong, you need to be educating as broad an audience as you possibly can, as long as it's targeted and, you know, actually relevant to you.
Yeah,
that's great. But if you do want to get further targeted within your ads, actually, you know, building that website audience with your blog is kind of a no-brainer and a brilliant thing to do, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, there's no denying that blogs are a form of content, and content is still a critical component in any B2B demand generation strategy. But it's also true to say that there is more types of content that make up a good content strategy for the most businesses. But the act of creating blog content is a really good way to keep flexing the content creation muscle, I suppose, within the business. You know, we've got an endless need to come up with new content that's helpful, that's relevant, that's interesting. And I think the more ways that you're creating and repurposing content, you know, the easier it is to keep that up. So written format content is, you know, as we said earlier, one of the forms of content that's still very effective. You still need it for the most part in your strategy, not the only one. But continuing to produce it is going to help you to produce the other forms of content that you want or need, either through repurposing one way or the other, or just by, you know, working out ideas, seeing what works, seeing what sticks, and using that to fuel other mediums.
Yeah. We've had a few questions here.
Wonderful.
Nikolai.
Hey, Nikolai.
Yeah. Hey, Nikolai. Back again with great questions, actually. He always brings great questions. I'll answer this one because it's kind of related to the retargeting question and topic that I was talking about. Can you segment your retargeting audience by blog page viewed, or is it just all website visitors? Well, you can segment by blog page viewed if you want to, or you can include selected blogs and selected website pages. Basically, however you see fit. I was more talking about LinkedIn retargeting. I'm not that familiar with Meta and other platforms, so I know for a fact, well, you can basically, on any platform, you can select which pages you want to add into your retargeting campaign. I would probably actually do this as well. Like, you will have some extremely top of funnel, broad blogs that aren't necessarily that relevant to what you offer and what you want to further educate people on. So I would be kind of selective in which blogs, like we do. Basically, I manually went through, selected some high traffic blogs that we get to our website and things like that to add to our retargeting audiences, just because otherwise you might have quite low volumes, or it just kind of broadens that audience, because naturally not all of your website traffic will be people that then you can track on LinkedIn. So
right. Presumably you've got to balance, you've got to have enough volume, enough quantity in order to run an effective campaign or run a campaign at all. Yeah. So you've got to compare, balance and contrast quantity versus relevance / quality to run an effective campaign. One thing I would typically urge marketers at small businesses to do is not race to segment their marketing budget too aggressively. It's quite common, when you're coming up with a marketing strategy, to come up with 7 or 10 or 20 personas, but most businesses can't afford to market effectively to 20 different personas. So you want to look for things that appeal broadly to the people that are coming to your content, and use that to get the most ROI, really. And later you can look at more narrower definitions of audience, narrower campaigns. Once you've got the budget, you've got the proven methodology, and and you've got the audiences too.
Yeah, the audience kind of depends on the content that you want to offer as well. Like if your retargeting campaign, and I know this is about blogging now, but this is just a little side track here. If your campaign is all about your product and how it helps people, and you've got testimonials in there and other forms of social proof, you probably want to be really, really selective about the blogs that you add to your retargeting campaign, because it might only be like versus content. If somebody's searching for, let's say, like HubSpot versus Salesforce, and as an example, HubSpot would definitely want to retarget people then with their product information. But if it was what is marketing, less relevant to a commercial orientated campaign.
Interesting stuff.
Right, this is a really good question as well from Nikolai, and then we'll answer George's afterwards. You might want to pick this one up first, Phil. It's a tricky one. So
okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. With product marketing, should you write bottom of funnel / conversion focused blogs, or leave all the selling to commercial pages? And if so, what kind of blog formats do you use?
Right, run that by me one more time.
With product marketing, should you use bottom of funnel / conversion focused blogs, or leave all the selling to commercial pages? And if so, what kind of blog formats do you use?
Okay, that's interesting. That's not something I've considered too much in the past. I mean, we're all familiar with the old sort of funnel model for the buyer's journey, which is to some extent a bit defunct, but nonetheless, people still go through a process of being unaware, aware, and so on and so forth. But, I think for the most part, again, if we're thinking about utilizing a limited budget most effectively, then selling does take place on commercial pages. There's not a lot of blogs that I think buyers would read, search for and read, without then going to the main website to validate the proposition and the features. So for me, blogging is about positioning your brand against questions and topics that interest buyers pre-purchase. And your website is where they come to understand your service you're offering and to buy, crucially. I don't think about it much more than that, ultimately. As I said, there's always a limit to how much you can create, just because of time and money. And so you want to be using the relatively efficient medium that is a blog article to go after, potentially relatively low volume, long tail queries quickly, cheaply, get people in, rank more highly with more costly pages for commercial keywords that people will visit before buying, and rely on buyers to do that, I think.
I don't really have much to add. Yeah, I agree. I probably wouldn't try and convert anybody through a blog anyway, actually.
Well, I mean, that's another point, correct, which is, trying to get people to convert. I've certainly seen historically, when comparing calls to action on, for example, blog posts, that trying to use calls to action to get people to take bottom of the funnel actions right there on the blog post has never performed as well as showing them relevant content, either in the old gated format or now more likely an interesting informational pillar page. Those calls to actions within blog articles, last time I checked data, performed better consistently than the blanket demo request CTA. Because, well, probably for a few reasons. Buyers are not in the right mindset. The intent isn't there at that moment in time to impulsively book a demo based on a CTA. That's what the website's there to do, to build the case for. And well, yeah, maybe just actually that both reasons are in there. Like that's not what they're there to do, and the context isn't there to justify it. So the content offers always performed better. That was been my experience.
Yeah, cool. Okay, We might need some more context on this question from George. Hey, George, nice to have you here, by the way. How do you see external agency blogs in the modern world of AI? For us, repurposing podcast clips and transcripts have been more successful versus commodity agency blogs. I'm not sure if that...
Well, not all agency blogs are the same, right?
Okay.
There is a scale and there is a spectrum, and there are probably overlapping scales in what companies can create themselves in-house, and a range of qualities and effectiveness. What agencies can create for you, which overlaps with that, and what AI can do for you, which probably overlaps with agencies to a certain extent. The content has got to be quality, and there's little benefit working with a commodity agency if it doesn't get you quality in terms of your content. Effective content also has to perform a role, right? And that role is not the same as regurgitating the contents of a data sheet or a spec sheet, or something that's from the words of a subject matter expert verbatim necessarily. It needs to translate that information and knowledge into content that's effective at reaching and engaging and keeping visitors there. So typically we use more or less lay speak. We try to keep it simple, approachable, digestible by a wider audience, because that's what gets results. Now, for some businesses, that's a very valuable function of a good agency. And we here create content for a wide range of businesses, and we do just that. We create quality content that bridges that gap with the audience. Now, I remember a conversation a couple of years ago with somebody on LinkedIn about this very topic, which is ultimately good content costs money. However you generate it, wherever it's produced, it costs money. And if you don't spend enough, you're not necessarily going to get the quality of content that's going to do the job for you. So you got to look at your agencies through that lens, I suppose. AI is a really interesting topic. I see AI as being today a very useful productivity tool for lots of people, writers included. But in the majority of industries where there's a degree of maturity, where there's a degree of scrutiny being applied, AI-generated content is most likely not going to be good enough to compete. And so if you just go to an AI tool, pop in a title, hit go, and then hit publish, you've got very little confidence, I don't think, that that's going to rank, be found, pass relevance, be internally linked correctly, have the right call to action in it, etc. These are things that marketers bring to the table and currently can't be replaced by AI. So you can use AI to get a percentage of the way there. What that percentage is, I think, differs dramatically business to business. For some businesses where there's one person, they're just getting started, there's nothing to lose, maybe there's no competition, maybe AI can get you 89% of the way there. But in industries where search is already populated with competitors, information's already high quality, AI maybe only gets you 20% of the way there. That's the way I look at it.
Well, yeah, and Google in the end of March, I think it was, just released an algorithm update, right? Which is punishing AI generated content.
Right.
That pure AI generic generated content.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how they measure the amount of AI in something versus the amount of human input in something, but they can, and they have punished websites already for doing so. And I think that's only going to get stricter. I think right now, they're focusing on the huge AI farms.
Exactly.
People that are putting out thousands and thousands of blog posts like generated by AI. But I only see them clamping down on that more, to be honest.
Yeah. It's interesting times.
On the point of repurposing podcast clips, well, let's focus on that for a second. I think doing that and blogging are two very different things. I assume when you're saying repurposing podcast clips, that's referring to distributing them in places that aren't your blog. Don't know, sure, you might want to clarify that, but that is a strategy for social, probably, primarily. Can't really compare to blogging.
No, using podcast content to fuel blog creation on the topic, great. that's absolutely fine. You know, an original piece of blog content that's inspired by, informed by, and made easy to write by a podcast episode or a video, fantastic. Direct transcripts of podcasts, not necessarily a terribly effective strategy, as we've seen ourselves.
We were just talking Monday about this, because so all of the Websites Decoded episodes, Phil's podcast, go onto our website. We had the transcript on there, which was actually laid out quite nicely, like not just a kind of copy and pasted raw transcript that you can't really digest, but actually these pages were just not ranking as well as if you took that content and just restructured it a little bit, added a little bit more refinement and context to it for the purpose of a blog. It would rank way better than a podcast page, which had the YouTube video on from the podcast and the transcript. Yeah, the blog ranked way better every time. Yeah, they struggled. They really did struggle to rank, even for quite easy keywords, and we have good domain authority.
Yeah, so. And something we haven't planned to talk about is like tips for good, effective blogging. Probably a separate topic, but it's interesting when you think about how well is a transcript aligned to the requirements and expectations of blogs amongst the viewing audience. The information in a transcript is fairly evenly distributed. A common pitfall in blogging is to write them in narrative style, where you build up and up and up and up and up and up and up to the conclusion, and that can lead to a little bit of lackluster performance as well. Often the best strategy for structuring your blog post is inverted pyramid. I often say and often try to give everything away, every little bit of value in the first line, so that if buyers only read the first line, they come away with the value that entire blog post offers. And that's what creates, because you don't really care about how long they spend on the page or how far down they get. You care about how much impact you have on their opinion of you, really. And giving away the crown jewels of your blog post in the first line or first paragraph is a great way to build that trust and affinity for you, no matter how much they read or how quickly they leave.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think we've answered that. Let us know if you have any follow-up questions on that, though. Okay, so in terms of the role that blogging now plays in the B2B buyer journey, I think it's safe to say that it has changed. We're still saying you should do blogging, but the role that it now has on a B2B buyer journey has shifted slightly, right?
Yeah. Ultimately, I'm trying to think of the right way to come at this, which is to say that buyers are turning to search at a different / later stage of the buying journey. We're seeing attention and the sort of ideation phase of discovery moving to other platforms. I want to let you talk about those platforms, but I think it's part natural conclusion of anything that marketers get good at starts to change in where it's effective. But search results have become so saturated with good content and bad content, but so optimized, so competed for, that buyers aren't using them to simply discover as much anymore. We don't typically turn to search and just query things in a loose way. We use it as a very targeted research tool. Meanwhile, the discovery, the having of ideas is happening more and more elsewhere.
Yeah, in places like social, in communities, in places like that, because, well, it's kind of twofold, isn't it? If somebody is totally unaware of a problem in the first place, like they don't even know that they have this thing that's causing them extreme pain or problems in their business, well, they're not going to search for it in the first place.
Right.
And they never have.
No, absolutely. I'm just trying to think under what circumstances would search have, been a part of that buyer's experience. But there are exceptions to every rule, right? There are, topics that either now or in the past, buyers would have simply searched out of curiosity and found brands talking about the challenges and had an epiphany there and then. But
Yeah.
it's matured to the point where everybody knows what they're going to get, everybody knows what to expect, and that forces a change in behavior, doesn't it?
Yeah, and like people used to subscribe to blogs and go to blogs to consume their new content, which might educate them on this thing that they didn't know existed or this problem they didn't know they had.
Yeah.
People aren't going to blogs anymore.
Not with that intention. There's an oversupply of information.
Yeah.
Meaning you've got to be really selective about which information you consume. And that means you only go to search when you've got a very specific query in mind and you want it answered for the most part.
Yeah.
So it's moved down the buying journey, moved more into you could call it the consideration phase. It's still pre-consideration, but I suppose there's a validation phase coming into the buying journey, perhaps. You become aware of your issues, you become aware of the opportunities, the solutions that exist. You probably then turn to search to inform yourself better about those things, to validate your ideas, your assumptions, correct what your mistakes that you've made, and then go into consideration phase type searches, I think.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, let's move on a little bit, because it's funny, isn't it? We're talking about why blogging is still good, why you should still use it, why it's a huge yes from us in terms of should still be used, still plays a great role. Why have people just stopped talking about blogging all of a sudden? Like, if I scroll through LinkedIn right now, I would not see a single post about blogging. Maybe that's because of the people I'm connected with or follow, even like newsletters I'm subscribed to. Nobody's talking about blogging, really, are they?
Yeah, no, it's true. And it is interesting. And I think it's a continuation of the discourse moves on. What new things become interesting, become exciting. Some simply continue quietly doing the things that have worked or they've got working for them, but they don't require as much advice, as much inspiration, as much support to do well as they did. But in other cases, they fall off the radar, right? And that's the problem with blogging in some situations, which is as the online conversation moves on and we hear more and more people, becoming overnight gurus and things, championing new things, they replace what we're doing. And it's going to be even harder, obviously, for businesses to continue blogging and to think clearly about it if it hasn't been getting them the results they want or expect or need. But that's not because it doesn't work anymore. Isn't because it isn't effective. But there are things that you can do well or poorly that affect how well you get those results. I think any other thoughts on why we're not talking about blogging right now?
Well, I think people have naturally moved away from search slightly, as we kind of spoke about in certain areas. And this is probably a good time to bring in Nikolai's question that he asked before we started, which was, if search is not a channel for your buyers, what can you use blogging for? Well, my simple answer to that would be, you probably don't need to use blogging.
No.
In that instance, it's probably quite rare to have a market that doesn't use search at all and you can't get any value from blogging whatsoever. But ultimately, go where your audience is, right? And if that's not search, you probably shouldn't be blogging. And we don't need to get into the tactics you should be doing to get in front of those. But yeah, understand your audience, understand where they go, where they consume content, where they learn, and be in those places. And if that's not search, blogging might not be for you.
Yeah, and spend that budget doing other things that are aligned to that that audience and where they are, for sure. Yeah Agreed.
Another point on that, though, is a lot of people perhaps haven't blogged or haven't started blogging. I was listening to 7K Social Club, Sarah Brannock, who we had on, a brilliant marketing leader, talking about some of the mistakes that she has made, and Hunters, her company, like marketing team, not mistakes, but things they wish they would have done at the start of their journey.
Yep.
And 3 years on, she said SEO was one of them. And I would kind of tie blogging into SEO.
Yeah.
And I suppose the question is, like, if you haven't thought about blogging, maybe because it's not being talked about anymore. Like, it's not the thing on marketers' mind when you've got a startup or something with a fresh new marketing team. They might not turn to blogging straight away as people did like 8-10 years ago, because it's not that cool thing anymore. But there's no harm in starting now.
Absolutely. I mean, the best time to start anything is 3 years hence, particularly when you've got compounding returns like blogging and SEO have the power to offer you. So if you haven't yet started, that's not a good reason not to start necessarily. I think you've got to evaluate your landscape, evaluate what you can afford to do within your budget, and probably wouldn't necessarily, in the majority of situations, recommend that blogging is the only thing that you consider starting. But again, as part of a complete content diet, blogging is a really important ingredient, because it lets you repurpose content you've recorded to camera. It helps you ideate for longer pillar pieces that are informational and so on. It's just a really good muscle to exercise, and there is always opportunity to be found in search. Either by niching right down, going after long tail queries. You've just got to be accepting of the fact that it might take time to reach sort of critical mass and get where you want to go. But I wrote an app on the side, and I launched it the other week, and I'm already thinking about using blogging to get people to be aware of it. And I'm not fearing the fact that because I haven't been doing it for the last 10 years, I've got no hope. It's very much top of my mind for a strategy to employ. And again, part of that is because it's fully in my control to do as much or as little of it as I want to, and to know what the outcome should be.
Yeah.
So I love it for those reasons.
Yeah, and like you've kind of said, it's that compounding effect from blogging. They last forever.
Yeah.
For as long as your website lives.
Yeah.
For as long as Google serves content in the way it does. And I don't think that's going to change drastically over the next 5, even 10 years. It will change, but I don't think it will change so much that we stop talking about optimizing your websites for search and things like that.
If you're a marketer, you've got to do things now that represent a good spend of your budget, and blogging is in many cases one of them.
Yeah.
Just one cluster of content organized around an SEO topic that is relevant, that you can penetrate, might not be the most attractive one, the most competitive one, but another one. It doesn't take heaps and heaps of content to show the signs of success that you can be having, which can help you justify it. But if you're looking for ways to smartly spend your marketing budget, blogging is one of them.
Yeah, we can maybe dive into, well, because when you talk about marketing spend, a lot of people will then go back to ROI and how do you look at the ROI at blogging. But maybe let's pick that up a little bit later.
Yeah,
because let's kind of get into maybe some of the mistakes that people are making or have made with blogging that have kind of led them to this question. Well, to question whether blogging is effective in the first place, or those people that are saying, blogging's dead, you need to do this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
It's likely that they've tried blogging. Most people have, or people might be trying blogging now, but are just doing some things ineffectively.
Yeah. I mean, lack of results, or lack of what we think are results, is a very common driver behind abandoning a strategy like blogging, right? So makes sense. For me, the first most sort of fundamental thing to get right is the writing the content looking outward at who your buyer is and what's interesting to them, as opposed to looking inward. And this is very much what one of the original purposes behind persona creation and documentation was. It was to get businesses to stop looking at themselves and writing content that was of interest to them, such as our new funding round, our new hire, see us at this event, we've got our new office, etc., etc. And to look out of the business and look at what their buyer was interested in and write content for their buyer. And that 180 turn is necessary before anything else can work. And that's what the persona was in a way, I believe, intended to ensure we did. If you get that wrong, then you've got no hope, really, and nothing else matters.
Yeah. The other thing for me is, even if you are writing outwardly, if you're not actually writing for search as well as your buyer, you're probably not going to have much success with blogging because nobody's going to find your blog. I feel like more and more people talk now about how you should be writing for the person who's reading your blog. And that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, if you're not writing or optimizing your blog for search, nobody's going to consume it anyway. So there's a fine balance there. And if you're not targeting keywords ultimately in your blog, nobody's going to find it, and it's pointless in blogging, I would say.
There is perhaps a grey area in the middle of that, but ultimately there was a time, yes, when when I was thinking about blogging for Blend and for businesses, I'd simply write any blog that I thought was an interesting topic, regardless of volume. And I was like, well, if it's interesting to me and I believe it's interesting to buyers, I'm going to write it, I'm going to publish it. That was before, I think, blogs were really nicely becoming organized around topics. The presence of topics as a strategy, I think, helps to think about blogs through a lens of search queries and search keywords more easily. And now, given where blogging exists in the marketing, in the buyer's journey and in the marketing strategy landscape, I do very much think more about, here's a query I want to be found for, and I'm gonna tick that off with a suitable piece of content. And that might be a blog post. And we've had very good success at writing blog posts that rank exactly where we want them. Or it might be a cluster of content around a pillar page that's necessary to rank for that term, because of its competition. But yeah, over time shifted much more towards an SEO led blogging approach. I'd still say, that writing for your audience is valuable. And I wouldn't say don't do it if there isn't 100 search volume for a term. Low search volume is fine, but it's good to write with search in mind, because ultimately, if a buyer doesn't go to Google or their search engine of choice and type in something similar to the title you've used on the topic that you've written about, you're not going to be found, and so you're going to have very limited impact from that piece of content.
The only exception is maybe if you have a newsletter with a lot of people subscribed to that you've accumulated over years, say, highly engaged, they are subscribing to literally get your blog content. Okay, you can probably write whatever serves their needs and not worry too much about search, because people are coming to your blog via the newsletter as opposed to search.
Yeah, that's true. Although, of course, how do you get new subscribers if they're not discovering you via search? So there's a sort of yin and yang to that. I'd almost go as far as to say, if your newsletter is so good that people are like literally waiting to receive it, then content should be in the newsletter only, potentially, rather than, because if you mix your intentions, you can mix your results a little bit. I don't know. I'm just thinking off the cuff about that. But I mean, you're right that search is key when it comes to blog creation, blog content, because if you're aligned to search, then you're going to get more results from it and get the best bang for your buck.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I just think if you are writing blogs and you're not looking at search volumes or keywords relating to that topic before you start blogging, I struggle to know why you would bother.
What's interesting about blogging and SEO, or rather content creation and SEO, is that the fact that we're saying you've got to bear SEO in mind might have some people saying, oh, but we've been told to write for the human, and you're telling me to prioritize SEO and write for the robot, and so on and so forth. We could debate that all day long, but my approach to this is I think about SEO up until I've written the title, and then I stop. And then I write the best damn post I can.
Yeah.
And then I go back and I look for opportunities to, as naturally as possible, link it up. But I'm not forcing SEO through the content. And when we commission work from our team of copywriters here, we're not forcing them to write with SEO in mind per se. We're aligning their piece of work to the SEO opportunity that exists, and then we're asking them to write the best piece of content they can on that subject. And then you should revisit it to make sure it's part of the right cluster and it's linked correctly. But you shouldn't change your approach to writing away from the human reader's interests, because that's what will get you the best results.
Yeah. I think let's kind of go down the ROI route now. And another potential reason why people see blogging as a failure is because they treat it as a lead generation exercise.
Yeah.
They try and get people into the blog, they attract them through search, and then have a CTA to an ebook or a guide that relates to that. And we know that that simply just doesn't work when it comes to converting those leads into pipeline and revenue further down. So ultimately, then your blog isn't working for you if you're measuring it on that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got a lot of leads to show for your blogging, but not a lot else, then it may be deemed a failure or not required. The fact is that lead generation isn't a great approach to pipeline generation anymore. Leads increasingly don't become buyers, and buyers increasingly remain entirely anonymous until they're ready to purchase, meaning focusing blogging on lead generation, measuring it in terms of lead generation, is measuring something which does not then translate into the overarching goal, the revenue goal. The slightly frustrating fact about good marketing is that by definition it's hard to measure. I think the performance era that we've been through was so attractive and so successful because it gave us the thing that we were lacking before, which is we're influencing buyers. They are sentient individual human beings. It's impossible to know exactly what they're thinking or doing at any point in time and what drove them to take a certain action on our site. Performance marketing kind of convinced us, almost pulled the wool over our eyes a little bit, that we could measure that. But we're starting to see the other side of that coin now. So blogging, is to some degree harder to measure the success of, the ROI of, than we would like it.
It's really hard, right? But like you say, most effective things in marketing are extremely hard to measure.
Yeah.
If you look at dark social as an example, the topic everyone's talking about, extremely hard to measure. That's why it's called dark social. Fortunately, blogging does have tracking analytics. If somebody accepts the cookies on your website and then comes back and converts ultimately on a high intent form, you could say, okay, somebody found me via my blog and then went on to convert on a high intent form.
Yeah.
But even then, I feel like you're clutching at straws a little bit.
Yeah, it's one way that you can, and one way that we've been able to sort of offset this lack of direct measurability is simply observe correlation over a long period of time. Correlation isn't always to be trusted, but if you can correlate and observe things, from the very infancy when you start and how they track and trend with your other results, you can usually see, in the case of blogging, that increased traffic to your site as a result of blogging correlates with increased inquiries through the bottom of your funnel. You can correlate, quality blogging with the reputation that people tell you have, what you're known for, what you're considered best at, as a result of what you rank for, what you're found for, and what people come to you inquiring about, and so on. So there's ways to connect the dots, but you are going to have to connect the dots a little bit. But you should also be looking at, we talked about the importance of SEO. Looking at where you rank for the terms you're targeting as you publish new content with that goal in mind is one way that I think you can give yourself a signal, a leading indicator perhaps, that you're doing the right things.
Yeah. And I think if you implement blogging in the kind of way that we've spoken about, in that you're using it to then influence your commercial pages on your website, you can then look at the success of those as well. How are they ranking for their commercial keywords that you're targeting?
Yeah.
How are people then going on to book a demo with you or take a free trial with you from those pages? And you can kind of say, okay, our blog has influenced the ranking of those pages too, or people getting to those pages through internal links. So
yeah,
a few ways.
Indeed.
But, yeah, you're not going to get direct attribution.
No. You might get some self-reported attribution that specifically calls out blog posts that you've written.
I would argue people would just say they found you
through
search.
Most will say Google. Occasionally, you get surprised.
We do, yeah.
Occasionally you get surprised. Or they might hint at the topic, and you've only really written about that in your blog, and so to speak. So there's ways to get additional information and context, but almost because it's good marketing, it's hard to measure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think unless there's any other questions, no. Now is probably I just realised I had that question up the whole time. See, that's the new setup. I don't have it open all the
Got
time.
Some gremlins to work out.
Yeah, everyone just saw George's question the entire time. Never mind. Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Nothing. No, nothing from me. I think we covered it in pretty good detail.
Yeah, same. Okay, well, let's wrap it up there then. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. Be sure to check out the full episode, any other episodes on all of the channels. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, just search for Demand Decoded. I'm going to plug Websites Decoded again because why not?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, be sure to check out Phil's other podcast, which is Websites Decoded, where he breaks down the success basically of demand generating B2B websites. Nice. Really insightful. So yeah, check that out if you haven't already. And other than that, we'll catch you next time.
See you there.